Welcome to Yeukai Business Show, UK's premier business show where we feature business thought leaders, high achievers, and industry experts. Today's episode is brought to you by World Outsourcing Solutions Limited, a company that specializes in helping executive business owners with virtual assistant services and business growth systems. Here's your host.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm Trevor Stockwell and I'm looking forward to a great discussion today. Our guest will be sharing with us proven steps to build resilience and also sharing some tools for moving through stress. She's a business owner herself who struggled in the past with massive stress, anxiety and insomnia, but has since studied trauma therapy and coaching and now provides practical solutions to business owners. She's a doctor of physical therapy, a stress and anxiety reduction health consultant, a holistic health practitioner, as well as a speaker and a podcast host. Welcome, Dr. Alice Kerby.
Thank you so much for having me today, Trevor. It's a pleasure.
Glad to have you here, and it's a great opportunity to be able to chat with you. I know you're going to talk to us about resilience and how to manage or overcome, work through stress. There's lots of different terminology people use. I guess maybe first off, am I right in thinking that stress is actually good for us if it's balanced?
I think when we look at stress, it's really important to look at, are we talking about like short-term stress or are we talking about a long-term chronic stress that kind of invades our system and then becomes part of how we respond to life? And short-term stress is natural. We're biologically programmed to have these cycles of acceleration or activity, which are basically it's a stress response, and so that's fine. That can help us, get away from a threatening situation if we need to. It can help to give us a little boost if we're working on a project, or maybe if we're doing a speaking engagement or something like that. A little bit of that activation energy certainly is not a bad thing, particularly as long as we let it come back down and go through a natural settling cycle. And that's really where we humans with our very smart cognitive brains get into a lot of trouble, is we try to really override our systems and don't come back down and allow for the natural settling cycle, which can then turn into this long-term chronic stress. And that's problematic. It can lead to a host of different disease processes, as well as some of the things that I myself experienced as far as that chronic anxiety and insomnia and ruminating thoughts. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners can relate to this, because there's just always something to do. There's never not something to do. So it's really easy to get caught up in, well, once I do this, then I'll just do this next thing, and then I'll do this next thing. And we don't really give ourselves the time and space. I think there's some fear around it, or there can be, that if I don't keep up or keep 2 steps ahead of it, I'm going to somehow fall behind. My business won't work. So it really is important to build that time into our lives and really into our nervous systems to come back down and settle after we go through those activation or stressful cycles.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm interested to find out more. So maybe before we go further in that, tell us a little bit about your background. It's kind of been a bit of a journey, hasn't it, to get you to where you are?
Yes.
You're well equipped. So share a little bit about that.
Sure. I will try to keep it brief. I definitely started along the path of healing and alternative medicine when I was in my early 20s, and I studied Chinese medicine at a school called the Hartwood Institute up in Northern California, and really learned about those theories, the meridian theories, how our bodies work within the cycles of the four seasons, et cetera, and gained a good amount of holistic knowledge from that point of view. I also did a study with some different Native American healers and shamans, and kind of learned more of these alternative healing techniques. And from there, I ended up, when I was 30, going back to college. I went to college at age 30. I was sort of tired with my own scope of practice. I was working as a massage therapist and doing some of this holistic healing, and really knew that I wanted a broader scope of practice to help more people. So I decided I'm going to go to school and get this doctorate. And so I essentially spent the next seven years in school. And really towards the end of my clinical doctorate in my physical therapy program, my own stress levels were just out of control. Like, I wasn't sleeping at all. I would get 2 to 3 hours of sleep at night. I was self-medicating with alcohol a lot, which is part of my story, where I was really trying anything to reduce the anxiety and the stress and to help me sleep and just to help get me back down to some sense of feeling normal. Cause I really was just riding on this consistent wave of I've just got to get through this and then I can rest. And so for like a year, I didn't really come down or rest. And that was pretty rough on my own system. I had a few anxiety attacks and panic attacks during that last year of school. And I really didn't have good tools or strategies to help myself to be able to get through that year without just kind of defaulting to trying to use alcohol. And, I would try to exercise and meditate, but it was like I didn't really have the glue to pull those pieces together. So, I got through that experience. Luckily, I passed my board exams, was practicing as a clinician for a few years. And then I got introduced to this work, the somatic experiencing work, which is a bottom-up modality, which really bottom-up just means that we work with the body, the physiology, and the nervous system, and let that affect change and how we go through life versus working from our conscious brain to affect change down into our bodies. So this is a wonderful modality. It was developed by Dr. Peter Levine based on his observations of animals in the wild who were under long-term stress and chronic stress and how they would, and actually short-term stress responses, or like I was saying earlier, the animals they'll go through a stressful situation. The antelope will run from the lion. And then the animal will go through this settling cycle where they'll do a little shaking or a little discharge. Maybe they'll kind of lay on the ground and twitch a little bit. And then they hop back up. The stress has been released and they go back about their way. And so this work was really intriguing to me. I first experienced it working with my own therapist, and it made such a huge impact in my own life and my ability to manage stress. My anxiety was so much like dramatically less. I'd quit drinking around this time too, which was really helpful. But adding the somatic experiencing work to that whole piece of the puzzle really gave me not only a way to like manage stress better, but it was a different way for me to be in my own body where I just didn't react the same. I didn't respond the same. And so I've spent the last 2 years enrolled in the training program to study that work. I have 2 more courses left, and then I'll be a full-fledged practitioner through the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute. But it's really changed my life. That's how I work with my clients now. I've really come away from clinical practice as a physical therapist and been able to tie in a lot of my years of study since I was, a 20-year-old up in the mountains in Northern California studying the Chinese medicine. But this somatic experiencing work has really helped me to pull a lot of the pieces together. And now I help primarily women work with their nervous systems, work with chronic stress, work with trauma, and in recovery from alcohol as well.
Wow. Okay. That's impressive.
Well, I don't know how brief that was, but no, you can give me the cane if you need to.
No, it's interesting. I find it fascinating. And it's also, whatever journey we've been on, that equips us to then help others, doesn't it? Generally, if we can kind of channel it and focus it in the right way, we're aware enough to do that. So no, it's interesting. So maybe what would be a few of because I was thinking about this and the things that you've studied and the way you help people, what would be, with regards to maybe stress to start with, what would be some of the sort of, I guess, anxiety? If people are suffering from anxiety, they're probably aware that, the stress is out of balance kind of thing. They're not dealing with it properly. What would be some of the telltale signs that maybe stress is starting to get out of balance before it becomes more obvious through maybe anxiety or something like that?
Sure. It's a great question. And I think there's a few ways I could answer it, but I'll try to just keep it as simple as possible. I think if we notice that we are primarily irritated, if we have a lot of resentments in our life, like if a friend wants to meet us for lunch and our first response is, God, don't they know I don't have any time? Things like that. If we are, if we're going through our days and not really feeling any sense of contentment or satisfaction, I think we really need to look at how are we spending our time? What are our stress levels at? And then as well, our physiological symptoms. Do we wake up with a racing heart? Are we sleeping at night? Do we go through the day really sweaty with a red face and a pounding heart. It's really good to look at what's happening to our bodies because they offer so much information to us. Are our guts constantly in a knot? Things like that can all be really strong indicators that we need to look at. How are we managing stress? Are we hyper reactive? Are we really angry? Are we unable to pause when something irritates us and we just go right to the reaction? That's a big thing a lot of my clients want help with, is to be less reactive. So all of those things, certainly, and there's a tool that I use with my clients called the window of tolerance. I didn't make this up, but it's really useful. And you can imagine two parallel lines. I'll kind of hold my hands up if someone is watching on the video. But then you want to imagine this kind of ebb and flow, this cycle that stays within the lines where it rises up like a sinusoidal wave, and then comes down and then up and down. And so when we're in this tolerable window and we know how that feels, where we can be stressed, but we can come back down, we're not so hyperreactive. When we can stay within this tolerable window, we're able to use some of our tools to help us. But when we're constantly like way up out of the window, again, at that like level 10 high reactivity, that's when we know, okay, something has to change. I need to do some kind of work or bring some sort of awareness in. So sometimes that visual of the window is helpful for people. I know sometimes explaining it isn't the best, but anyone who works with me or really even does any of my free workshops or courses, I always talk about this window of tolerance because it's really helpful to be able to see like, oh, yesterday I was way up out of that window because X, Y, and Z happened and I was hyper reactive. Or maybe this other day I was able to really flow through the ebbs and flows and my stress levels weren't off the charts. So anything where we feel out of control, I think that's a big indicator, especially consistently.
Yeah. And I kind of partly behind the question was also, if we're aware of those things, we could then potentially spot them in other people and
yes.
hopefully kind of evade them from going too far down the wrong way. Although if they are at the irritable stage, maybe pointing out the fact that they showing higher signs of stress than normal is not the most diplomatic way of doing it. So yes, there's a balance to that, I guess. But no, I find that's really useful because it's the level of self-awareness that we operate in that helps us to see, actually, I'm not doing this, or I am doing this, or there's too much of this, and the balance isn't quite right. So no, that's really good. What would be some of you talk about practical steps of kind of managing, or I'm kind of reluctant to use managing stress because you mentioned more about working through stress. So what would be a good way for somebody that's listening to this thinking, I know that I'm not juggling everything the way I should. I know there's a couple of things from what you said that, I really need to pull the reins in now rather than let it get out of hand. What would be some of the sort of steps that they could take that would help them get the balance?
Yeah, there's a few things that I think are helpful. And one of them is to start being aware of, let's say if we look at stress like a ladder, and when you're up at like the top rung of the ladder, it's when you're just kind of you're out of control, your conscious brain isn't involved, you're just reacting. And so to start noticing when we're on the lower rungs of the ladder, like to start noticing some of our physiological symptoms with it. Oh, is my chest really tightening right now? Like, let me just pause for a minute and kind of assess what's happening in my world while I can still use my tools to come back down. So to recognize it when it's at the lower stages, because I think sometimes we run on this, like, I'm fine, I'm blowing the roof off. And to, instead of doing that, start to recognize like, oh, I'm not quite fine. Something seems off, or, I'm definitely a little bit irritable now. Because usually, like, at least with anger, we'll sort of go from frustration to anger to rage. And if we can, and I think stress is similar. I don't know that I have 3 words for it, maybe like irritability, stress, and then hyper stress, flipping your lid. But if we can recognize it when we're down lower on the ladder, that becomes really helpful, because then we don't necessarily have to ascend up to level 10. And it also puts us in the driver's seat a little bit more, where then we can make a conscious choice. We can say like, okay, I'm going to step away from my screen for 5 minutes. Or I'm recognizing that my heart's really pounding and I'm really sweaty. So I'm going to I don't know, go do 5 minutes of breathing or whatever it is. We can make a choice so that then when we come back to whatever the stressful situation is, we're approaching it from a new perspective. So I think that's really helpful. And then as well, as much as we can, and this is easier to do when we're not in the real hyper stress states, but to practice the pause. And so to see if we can really pause between the stimulus and our response, and just physically, you can imagine an actual pause button that you press, or you can almost play like a freeze tag with yourself, like a gentle freeze tag. I don't really want anyone to go into a freeze state, but just to pause and notice, like, okay, this thing happened. I can make a choice about how I want to react. I'm just going to pause for now. That's a really helpful tool. It's not that easy to put into practice at first. So I know a lot of things are simple, but not necessarily easy to do. And all of this is a practice. It's learning to work with our systems differently, especially if we've been highly reactive for a long time and that's what we're used to.
Okay. No, that's really good. I'm kind of at the moment just trying to, just on a small scale in that sense, but just as I have a sip of water throughout the day, just use that moment of sipping to just pause.
Yes.
Because I find I can go from one thing to the next and just keep going, and then I just stop, kind of thing. And I think that's probably not the best way long term to deal with things. So just having that physical thing of when I have a sip of water, I'm going to use it to pause. So for me, tying it to something practical really helps.
I love that.
There's other kind of things that you can do, I guess, but no, that's really helpful. I think we undervalue the power of pausing. It's really good that you said it. I find that myself. Just to reflect on certain things as well, of like, how have I been in the last hour or so, working to whatever deadline it might be, or something that I want to achieve by a set time. How have I actually been over the last hour? You can't do it all the time, but I think regularly it's a useful thing to just gauge where we are and hopefully
very useful
tweaks. So, no, that's really good. Would you say there's a difference between stress and anxiety? And if so, how would you differentiate the two?
I mean, I'm sure there's a clinical diagnosis that is different. So we could probably, Google that. I don't know what that is, so I won't claim to, but I think anxiety comes in more when we are on that long-term, hyper stress response, when we don't allow ourselves to come back down, when we're, kind of how you were just saying, when we just go through our days, getting things done, and we don't ever pause to let ourselves drop back down into our body, to have a settling cycle. I think when we're in that state for a while, that will really lead to anxiety. I think that's one factor. There's certainly other things that can cause anxiety with trauma or environmental factors, but in relationship to stress, that's the connectivity that I saw, at least for myself, and certainly with some of the people that I work with as well. And so when we can teach the system to start coming down in some of those settling cycles, to simply pause and be present in our bodies, which sounds so simple. It's like we overlook it and don't place importance on it. But I mean, what's the difference in our lives when we can walk through actually being here and being present versus just constantly being on robot accomplishment mode? It changes everything, and it's a lot more pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remembering we're human beings, isn't it? Not human doings.
Yeah.
I've fought for that one quite a few times. It's mixed up in the joy of things that you want to get done, but it's just taking it that little bit out of balance. Well, hopefully it's only a little bit. Maybe I'm just hiding it.
No, I like your technique of using the sip of water. I think that's such a great point to tie it to some sort of behavior that you do regularly. I love that you said that.
Yeah.
It's very smart.
I like you mentioned about cycles. So there is benefit. Well, let me not give my opinion on this. Would you say that there's benefits in kind of routines, habits that we build in, kind of secular, if you like, with regards to how often we rest or pause or come away from a screen? Or do you have any kind of routines that you found that work for you that would generally work for people? Obviously, certain personalities like to do certain things differently than others, but are there sort of some good basics if that's the right word, that we've forgotten or just think, no, we're past all that. We're intelligent people now. We've grown out of all of that. When really it's the rhythm of life that, if we get that right, life works well, doesn't it? If we get it wrong, then we're in trouble. Any kind of habits or routines that you think are good things that we can put in place?
Sure. And it's a great point. I think of it really like putting money in the bank almost, like our daily practices and our daily routines sort of give us that solid foundation so that when times are stressful, because life is stressful, there's going to be, grief and death and accidents and, not for anyone here today, but these things are part of life, right? So it's like with those daily habits, we're putting money into the bank of building our solid foundation. And to answer your question, I know for me, what's kind of a nice triad is to do some kind of movement practice, whether it's some qigong movement or a little bit of yoga or stretching. I'm a pretty physically active person. So I've been doing Pilates 3 times a week. And for me, that's been hugely helpful with the breathing and the strengthening. And that really pulls me into my body. So some kind of movement, even if it's 5 minutes every day, stretch your spine, do some breathing, and some kind of meditative practice, which doesn't necessarily have to be sitting. You can lie down and observe your breath, but just even 5 minutes to focus on what's happening in your body and to just try to cultivate some stillness and awareness. I think those are really useful. And then find what works for you. Some people really like to journal a little bit in the morning, even write a page. Some people like to do prayer or read something inspirational. For me, the movement, meditation, and gratitude. I have a little gratitude practice. I think that's really nice to kind of come into your day with, what am I grateful for? Our power went out in the middle of the night here because we're having all these high winds I mentioned before we started the show. And I find myself awake at 2 a.m. or something, and our fans off and just everything is quiet. And so I can hear the ocean out the window. And I was just laying there this is such a neat moment to take in, and kind of cultivating gratitude of just being able to be in this more quiet place without all the electromagnetic energy or whatever happens, and to hear the ocean. So I think to take little moments like that when they arise it's really sweet.
Yeah. I think gratitude is a huge element. Yeah. And as you say, however people decide to adopt or practice gratitude, definitely, I would say it shifts our perspective, doesn't it? From maybe the things that, we spend 90% of the day trying to achieve and to get to a status or a position or money or whatever it is. And we can miss the fact that we're surrounded by so many good things. And I think being grateful for a lot for the things we don't have as well as the things we do have. I think that for me, that helps keep things in perspective a little bit better. I'm still working on that one, but no, that's really good. So let me quiz you, if that's the right word, on building resilience, because I think it's an area that's another area that's kind of maybe overlooked in the value of what it can bring. If we could just download resilience, that would be amazing. But like most of the useful and helpful things in life, they grow, don't they? They take time. They need to be built and kind of nurtured. Yes. So can you share some tips with regards to resilience? Because that's, well, I suppose first of all, what would be your perspective on resilience and the value of it?
Sure. So I think I like to work with resilience in a broad definition. A lot of times resilience is looked at as just the ability to bounce back from a difficult situation. And it certainly encompasses that. But there's also this idea of growing resilience when things are going well. And I talk a lot about building resilience within our nervous system. And so that can mean expanding our capacity to feel good, which is not always. And I think that's really important too, is to notice these moments when things are going well, like when we're having that moment I just described of laying in the bed and hearing the ocean with the quiet, to slow those moments down, to take in what's happening in our body when we're feeling good. What are the sensations of this pleasant experience? Because that helps to build resilience within our system, and it builds our capacity to experience more and more and more of that, so that I like the metaphor of tending a garden where we're both pulling the weeds and we're working with these, maybe some of our high stress responses and trying to do some change, but we're also, planting flowers and we're growing the good and cultivating what is good, or slowing down the moments of when we're having a pleasant experience. And that can go a really long way in building resilience, almost like that same analogy of putting money in the bank with our daily practices. As we work with our system to slow down, to pause, to notice when we feel good, we have more of a base to stand on, so that when there is a bad situation or when things are difficult, we already have that resilience in place. It's not like we just develop resilience all of a sudden because something bad happens and we have to get through it. It's something that can be cultivated. I think there's also could be a misconception that it's something you either have or you don't. It's a practice. We can build and grow resilience within ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So my next question, really, you probably guess where this is going. Any tips on how we can build resilience, other than what you've mentioned about sort of gratitude and taking time to think through things, but the practical side? The reason why I'm asking is because I think you have good expertise with regards to the physical side of how we work, certainly more than I know, and probably more than most people that are listening know. So if there's anything that is maybe now normal to you, might not be as normal to us, to get the body working as it should, which then helps every other aspect of life function better. So yeah, how could we sort of, some practical things to build resilience, grow good things in the garden, I suppose, is a good way of putting it.
Sure. So paying attention to what's happening in our physical body is kind of my number one thing. If we're talking about building resilience within our autonomic nervous system, which the autonomic nervous system is like the automatic system that has its hands in all of our organ systems and all of the functions of our body. So if our system is constantly under stress, it affects everything in our body. And so if we're working with trying to cultivate more resilience, grow more resilience in our system, we want to actually talk to that part of the system. And so we do that through using the language of sensation. And so this is a big part of the work I do. But anyone can practice it, and it might not feel comfortable at first, but it's sort of a neat exploration. There's a practice called interoception, which just means being aware of what you're feeling as you're feeling it. So instead of just feeling cold, you're noticing that you're feeling cold. And so in working with the practice of sensation, we start noticing like what's happening in my body right now, like on a physical or physiological level. For example, like, I have some tightness in my chest. And instead of going through this rigmarole of, I'm tight in my chest because I have anxiety and that's because of this and this thing happened, I just simply observe that my chest feels tight. And I try to just stick with that sensation level of awareness and notice what happens next. And as best I can, try to be the curious observer of my physical sensation. And inevitably, things will change. And it allows some of that stored up stress response that does get kind of stuck in our body. It allows that to unwind and to move. So yeah, start noticing what's happening in your body on a sensation-based level. And I think that's a new practice for a lot of people. It may not make sense to people, but when we look at how involved the autonomic nervous system and everything, it's a wonderful place to start.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really good. I'll look into that a bit more as well. So depending when people are listening to this, we are still kind of, as a planet, navigating COVID-19 to some, in one form or another. So in a lot of ways, that's brought a different kind of stress and issue that we all have to face. What would be some of the things? So if you're running a business, generally there's plenty of opportunities to be stressed. I would say that's the way of putting it. Then you kind of throw COVID into the mix, which nobody was expecting, and we're all learning how to get through it and overcome it. What would be some of the things maybe that you've experienced yourself over the last year as a business owner? How have you kind of embraced the opportunity to learn how to adapt, to be flexible, or just to get through the last year in a positive way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I will just say, like, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, so much of the stress that I do have, particularly in the past year, a lot of the work I've done really has been how to be less stressed in running my business, because I think we care so much about what we're creating. We're so personally invested in it. It can be really difficult to like detach who we are from who we are as the business owner. So, and during COVID, I think that's always good advice, is to really work on like, who am I outside of my business? Who am I as Alice? And then who am I as, Dr. Kerby running this business? And how am I doing in both things? So I always invite anyone who's who's working similarly to do that practice, even check in daily of like, well, who am I without this? How am I doing? And then with COVID, I think the first thing is to really recognize we have been in a prolonged stress response, a prolonged, like, we're on hyper alert because there's been this global threat. So our bodies know this is happening, even if our lives haven't changed much. There is this threat response that's going on inside of us. And so just to recognize that for what it is, to say like, hey, this is a tough, tricky time. And that's okay if I don't feel 100% every single day. And so just to recognize that it's there. I think community has been really, really important. And if whether that could be anything, whether that's family, friends, I think for entrepreneurs and business owners, some kind of a mastermind or a group that you have with other people going through the same thing. Entrepreneurship can be very lonely. And so to have some kind of a community around it is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Always, but definitely through COVID, just so you don't feel like you're, if you live alone and then you're just working at home alone on your business all the time, that can really lead to a lot of stress or even, loneliness and depression and things like that. So to cultivate some Zoom time with your colleagues where you could get excited about what is going well or lament about what isn't going as well as you'd like, that's really, really important. And then the last thing I'll say on that is really developing and spending time with those daily practices we talked about earlier, just to continue to lay your foundation, even if it's 5 minutes a day, just something to check in with yourself and do a little movement, a little breathing, a little gratitude.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. And I guess the challenge is for each of us to take enough time to realize the things that work for us.
Yes.
And in the way, because if everyone adopts the way that either you would do it or I would do it, and it's not naturally for them, it's not enjoyable for them, it's not going to work, is it? So we all have a certain level of responsibility. We can learn from others, and then how does that filter into, our individual selves? What is it that we like doing? What is it the things we don't like doing? And don't do the things, if you can't avoid it, you have to. But if you don't like doing stuff and you can avoid it, find the stuff, replace it with something that you like doing. No, I like
absolutely. And I'd like to look at it like, like an experiment. And this is kind of the way I teach or work with people as well. Like, try it for 30 days. We get so locked in, I think, to like, I need to do it this way and I have to have this practice and it has to look like this. And it's like, well, create something you think you're going to like, give it a shot for 30 days, run the experiment on yourself. Do you feel better? Great. Maybe keep doing it. Do you not feel better? Try something else. And just have there be a little more like flexibility and breathing room with trying some of these new things. Give it a fair shake. I like 30 days as a trial period, and then, move on, be flexible.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, there is a tendency we want to master it straight away and then just repeat it over and over. And that in itself, the monotony of that can be the very thing that adds more stress and, doesn't work for us. I kind of noticed the time. We are kind of coming to the end of our time together. It's gone very fast, so I appreciate your time with us. Quite a few other things I'd love to ask you, but everything you shared so far has been really helpful. I've got some takeaways from it as well, so I'm sure everybody that is listening has as well. How can people kind of touch base with you? What's the best way if they want to find out, learn more about what you're doing, get involved with what you're doing? What's the best way?
Sure. So I direct people to my website. It's KerbyMethodConsulting.com. And my last name, Kerby, is spelled Kerby. So KerbyMethodConsulting.com. You can find out more of my story. I run courses once a quarter. And then I'll do workshops and free events. Today, which is the 25th of January, when we're recording this, I'm hosting a free movement and meditation 30-minute practice this afternoon. So I do things like that frequently, and I'll have those on my website, or there's a form you can fill out. Just contact me with any questions or queries or anything you'd like to know about my work. And I get back within 24 hours of getting those forms. So I'm active on social media as well, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So people can find me there as well.
Yeah, no, that's good. We'll put the links below where people are clicking on to find this. There'll be links below for that as well. So that's really good. And your podcast as well, that's via your website?
Podcasts you can find on there is a link to it on my website, but I'm on all the major distribution channels. It's called Beyond the Pink Cloud. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, it's a cool podcast. I interview a lot of really neat, amazing people, and I'm like, oh, great, you're coming on to talk to me. Let's go. It's a lot of fun. Sounds
good. Yeah, no, it's a great way of learning about ourselves and learning about other people's skills and all that they can share with everybody else. So no, that's really good. Thank you for your time. It'd be great if at some point in the future you're able to come back and chat more. Sure. I've got my list of questions I will keep for then. But thank you. Everything you shared today has been useful. And there's more than enough that if we put it into practice now, our lives can be better. So, really appreciate that. One last thing I will mention to everybody that's listening before I sign off is Yeukai's Lifestyle Mastermind. So Dr. Alice did touch on masterminds briefly there. So it's kind of a nice transition there, unintentional. But just if there's a link below where you can register, depending when you're listening to this, it might already be closed. Stay tuned for news of the next one if that's the case. But there should be a link below where you can register. And it runs throughout the year. And the idea is you get together with a panel of experts that Yeukai is bringing together to talk through the important parts of life that cover money, relationships, and our health. What do we consider success to be? All those sorts of things. So if you've not been involved in a mastermind before, it's a great opportunity to sound other people out, learn from them as well. And I'm sure you'll have certain things that you can share with them to help them on their journey as well. So definitely check that out as well. And also go to Dr. Alice's website, catch some of the podcasts as well, because we only touched the surface today. There's lots more that we can learn from everything she's gone through and the way she helps other people. So definitely follow her and get more from her through those channels. That's it for now. Just want to remind everybody that you can put stuff into practice that we've spoken about today, and you'll benefit from it. We believe in you. We believe that you're well able to do it. And the more that you're proactive about things, the better, more success you will experience. So we will leave you there until next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Yeukai Business Show. We will be back to bring you more episodes with success stories and advice straight from the experts. Want more? Check out www.yukaibusinessshow.com. Get your free trial of our virtual assistant service today. Just visit www.worldoutsourcingsolutions.com. Quote WOS18 or send us an email at support@worldoutsourcingsolutions.com.